The overnight radio traffic went quiet for exactly 4 minutes before it cracked open again, and that was the longest my heart has ever sat still. Unit 41, respond to a 2-vehicle MVA, Route 9 near the grain elevator, reports of one entrapped. I'm Callie Reyes, 26, and I've been riding as a paramedic out of Blessing County EMS for going on 3 years now, mostly nights. Mostly the kind of nights where the only company you get is corn on both sides of the road and a partner who talks too much or not at all. That night I had Denny driving, and Denny doesn't talk, which suited me fine because my stomach had already dropped the second dispatch said, entrapped. That word does something to you. It sits in your chest like a stone. We came up on the wreck with our lights painting the ditch red and blue, and there was a sedan folded around a fence post like it had been trying to hug it. The driver's door wouldn't give. A man was slumped against the wheel, blood webbing down from his hairline, and when I got close enough to talk to him, he opened his eyes and the first thing out of his mouth wasn't a groan, it was a joke. Guess I should have taken the bus, he said, and even bleeding he had this crooked half-smile that made me forget for one dumb second that I was supposed to be checking his pupils. Sir, I need you to hold still for me, I said, snapping into the voice we're trained to use, calm and flat, even though my hands were doing that thing where they move faster than my brain can keep up with. What's your name? Nate, he said, Nate Alvarez. Am I going to live to regret that bus joke? Depends on how many more you make, I told him, and Denny, cutting the door hinges with the spreader, snorted behind his mask. We got him out, got him packaged, got him rolling toward Blessing County Memorial with lights and sirens splitting the dark highway wide open, and the whole ride he kept up this steady stream of talk, half of it nonsense, the kind people say when they're scared and don't want to admit it. I held his hand more than protocol strictly required. I told myself it was to keep him oriented. That was a small lie I let myself believe. At the hospital, they took him back, and I figured that was the end of it, the way it almost always is. You hand a person off at the ER doors and you never find out how the story ends. You just move on to the next call, the next stretch of dark road, the next stranger's worst night of the year. It's a strange kind of grief nobody warns you about in this job. Caring for 10 minutes with everything you've got, then letting go completely, over and over, until you build a callus over the wanting to know. Except 3 weeks later, I walked into Ruth's Diner off Main Street on my one day off, dressed in real clothes for once instead of navy polyester, and there he was in a booth by the window, a thin white scar stitched above his eyebrow, looking entirely too healthy for a man I'd last seen strapped to a backboard. "You're the bus joke guy," I said before I could stop myself. He looked up, startled, and then that same crooked grin split his face. "You're the woman who told me to hold still. I never got your name. I asked the hospital and they said that's not information they give out." "Callie," I said, "and for the record, you didn't hold still." In my defense, I was mildly concussed. "You made 3 more jokes on the way to the hospital." "Comedy is a coping mechanism," he said, and gestured at the seat across from him like it was the most natural thing in the world, like we hadn't met with the jaws of life between us. "Sid? I owe somebody a coffee. Turns out it's you." I want to tell you I said no, that I kept it professional, walked out, went back to my apartment and my dog and my ordinary Sunday. But I sat down. I told myself it was just coffee, just curiosity, just wanting to see how the story that got cut off in the middle actually turned out. And if you've ever wondered what happens to the strangers you help and then never see again, maybe you understand why I couldn't make myself walk past that booth. That was how it started. Coffee that turned into 2 hours, into him walking me to my car, into a phone number written on a napkin because neither of us had our phones handy, which felt almost old-fashioned, and I liked that about it. He worked construction, was recovering slow but fine, and he told me later that the whole time he was trapped in that car, he wasn't afraid of dying so much as afraid nobody would notice how afraid he was. And then I showed up talking to him like he mattered more than the blood on his face, and something about that had lodged itself in him and wouldn't come loose. I should say here that Blessing County is small, and EMS folks and hospital folks run into their old patients constantly, buying groceries, at the gas station, at church. Most of the time it's a nod, a glad you're doing better, and that's the whole transaction. I'd never once thought of a patient as anything else. There's a line you don't cross, not while someone's still your patient, not while there's any thread of dependency between you. But Nate wasn't my patient anymore by the time we sat in that diner. He wasn't under anyone's care. He was just a man with a scar and a bad sense of humor. And I was just a woman who couldn't stop noticing that his hand span was exactly the same as mine when we compared them stretched flat on the table, laughing about nothing. It wasn't smooth after that, either, because I carry this job home with me most nights, and there were weeks I canceled dinners because a call ran long, because I'd worked a double, because I came home smelling like antiseptic and didn't want to be touched by anyone, even someone I liked. Nate didn't understand it at first, the silence I needed after a bad call, the way I'd stare at my own hands sometimes like I was checking they still worked right. You don't have to explain everything, he told me one night, maybe 4 months in, when I'd shown up at his place still in uniform after a call that hadn't ended the way we wanted it to. I just want to sit here. You don't have to talk. Nobody had ever offered me that before, just sitting, no explaining required. And I remember thinking that maybe this was what people meant when they said somebody was good for you. Not fireworks, but a kind of steadiness. Someone who could hold the quiet with you instead of needing it filled. We've been together 1.5 years now. He still makes jokes at the worst possible times, which drives me half out of my mind and also, if I'm honest, is one of my favorite things about him. Sometimes I think about how differently that Route 9 night could have gone. A few more minutes trapped, a few degrees of impact, and I'd never have gotten that second chance at his story. I've carried plenty of calls that didn't end so lucky, and I think about those people too, wonder who they left behind, wonder if it's wrong that one specific ending got to be mine to keep. Last week, he took me back to that same stretch of Route 9, just to look at where the fence post used to be before the county finally replaced it, and he asked me, half joking and half not, if I believed things happened for a reason. I told him I didn't know, that in my line of work you learn fast that reason doesn't have much to do with who gets hurt and who doesn't, and that's a hard thing to sit with. But I told him I do believe some nights hand you something worth staying awake for, and I've stayed awake for worse things than a man who can't stop cracking jokes on a backboard. He asked me to marry him right there on the shoulder of that highway. No ring yet, just the question, laughing that it wasn't the most romantic spot, but it was the truest one he had. I said yes before he even finished the sentence, and I've wondered ever since whether anyone else out there has held somebody's hand on the worst night of their life and felt something start instead of end, because I never expected mine to, and I still don't have a tidy way to explain why it did.